The first case testing the illegal actions of the Trump administration has made its way to the United States Supreme Court. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started.
You know, Paige, there has been a lot of lawsuits filed and a lot of discussion about the cases that the administration has lost, some of the cases that they've won, concerns that the administration might simply ignore court orders. But in at least one high-profile case, the administration has taken the extraordinary step of appealing a temporary restraining order, first to the D.C. Circuit, where they lost, and now to the U.S. Supreme Court.
In this case, Hampton Dellinger, the head of the Office of Special Counsel, claims that he was fired by Donald Trump on February 7th for no reason, violating federal law that protects the Office of Special Counsel. Now, Marc, explain to us exactly what the OSC does and why it's so important that the head of that office has protections from firing.
Yeah, so despite the name Office of Special Counsel, this is not a special counsel in the way in which Jack Smith or Robert Mueller were special counsels. They were special counsels appointed by the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, to investigate criminal cases. The Office of Special Counsel, on the other hand, is sort of the chief agency that handles complaints by whistleblowers. So they are sort of like an Uber inspector general. In that whistleblowers can bring complaints to them. They can investigate allegations of wrongdoing or fraud or abuse within the executive branch. And like agency inspectors general, you want the person who is the head of this office to be as independent from political pressure as possible, because their job is to actually root out corruption and waste within the executive branch, right? So you don't want them being able to be pressured by a president or by a White House. So their position is protected, even though they are appointed by a president and confirmed by the Senate. They serve a fixed term and are not subject to being fired except for cause. So, you know, if the special counsel, engages in criminal wrongdoing or misbehaves in some corrupt way, they can be fired for cause. But what's interesting here is Donald Trump is not arguing that Hampton Dellinger has done anything wrong. He's not arguing that Hampton Dellinger is derelict in his job. He's not arguing that he has violated a law. He's just saying, I don't want Hampton Dellinger to be the special counsel anymore, and I'm the president of the United States, so I want to fire him. Now, below that, of course, is he doesn't want anyone independent of him in the federal government. So it is the latest in a series of efforts by Donald Trump to purge the executive branch of checks on him and his administration. But in this instance, Dellinger went to court and won a temporary restraining order. And like I said, this case is now sitting before the 9 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court.
And the case that Trump admin make to the U.S. Supreme Court sounds pretty extreme to me. They say that the case involves a, quote, unprecedented assault on the separation of powers because the president should have unrestricted power of removal of executive officers that were appointed by previous presidents. Marc, that sounds wild. Is it as crazy as it sounds?
Yeah, so this case has a number of problems for the administration. And it's the reason why, frankly, when we get a decision, this case may not wind up being as consequential as people are assuming. Because the first thing that the justices have to decide is whether the justices can even decide the case. Because as I mentioned, the district court issued what is referred to as a temporary restraining order. Now, a temporary restraining order is the most preliminary action a federal court can take. It is simply trying to freeze the status quo while both parties can submit briefs, can present evidence, and then the court can make a more permanent decision, oftentimes called a preliminary injunction, because even though it's not the final answer, that is an answer that will hold oftentimes for a period of months or even years. But temporary restraining orders can only be in effect essentially for 14 days. And under the rules that courts operate, they are therefore not appealable. Right? You cannot appeal a temporary restraining order. The theory is that by the time you appeal the temporary restraining order, the status quo has, been maintained, and it's going to only be for 14 days, and the parties have not fully briefed the issues. So it's an incomplete record for an appellate court to even review. So normally you cannot appeal temporary restraining orders. When this went up to the DC Circuit, that is in fact what the DC Circuit said. The DC Circuit didn't say that Hampton Dellinger was right or that Donald Trump was wrong. It simply said, look, you can't appeal this order because it is a temporary restraining order. Wait for the court to issue a further order, and then that becomes appealable. Now, interestingly, one judge on the DC Circuit dissented from that, said that given the exigent circumstances that you just articulated, that the White House believes are exigent, and in his view, that the fact that the Trump administration is likely to win, he would grant relief and would reverse the TRO. But that's the first issue, and really the central issue that is going up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court could, dare I say, should simply dismiss the appeal as wrongfully sought, that they have to, that we are now how many days into the 2 weeks, let the trial court hold a hearing for a preliminary injunction, let the court rule on a preliminary injunction. If at that point the court rules that Hampton Dellinger stays in office, then that becomes an appealable order that can come back up. So that is sort of the first problem with the position that the Trump administration has, is just procedural. And like I said, that may leave a lot of people feeling like this case was a false start if that's how it goes. The second problem is, as you say, is on the merits, which is that the country has a long history of having these independent watchdogs within government. As I mentioned, the inspector generals, the Office of Special Counsel. But they're not the only ones. There are others of these kinds of watchdog positions, and they are usually insulated from political decision making. Frankly, the head of the FBI has a fixed term. Now, it so happens the head of the FBI resigned, allowing Kash Patel to be nominated. But that was one of these positions. We have seen Donald Trump fire the head of a number of independent agencies that have similar protections, the head of the NLRB, for example. That's also a case that is proceeding. And I think it's important to understand that context, Paige, because they are doing this because they want to break the system, right? You could imagine a world in which Donald Trump could say, I am firing Hampton Dellinger, and here is my cause, okay? I don't think he's done a good job. I think he was ineffective. He doesn't share the vision of the administration. Now, there would then be a quibble as to whether or not that is in fact good cause. But then he'd be fighting from the ground of like, look, I'm the president. What may not be good cause to you, Your Honor, is good cause to me. And maybe he attracts votes of sympathetic judges and justices who say, okay, well, he gave cause. He's purposely not giving any reason because he wants the judiciary to have to eat this. And I cannot say this enough times. Donald Trump appointed incompetent people into his cabinet to make Senate Republicans debase themselves, make them eat it by voting for these people. He is humiliating members of his cabinet, people like Marco Rubio, because he wants them to know that he can make them do anything. Think about what Emile Beauvais did with the prosecutors in the Eric Adams thing. He wanted them to sign a piece of paperwork to dismiss a case. He could have signed that piece of paperwork. He didn't need to make a line assistant do that. But this is an administration that is about loyalty tests. It's an administration about forcing career people, federal judges, honest officers of the government, forcing them to do things that are violative of their oath, violative of the law, violative of norms, whatever it is, because he wants to prove that there is no constraint on him or his power.
The Trump administration has made this outrageous claim to the U.S. Supreme Court. They're seeking emergency relief. You said that this TRO is set to expire within 2 weeks anyway, that it's supposed to expire February 26th. It is now February 19th. What do you think we'll see next, and on what kind of timeline will it happen?
Yeah, so I think we're headed towards a ruling from the Supreme Court, probably the end of this week or the beginning of next, which is a real shame because, as you point out, the TRO expires next week. It's a shame that we're even going through this, but the petition got filed for review. The Chief Justice, who oversees the District of Columbia, called for responses, which is basically just a quick round of briefing. Those briefs will get posted by the end of today, and then we'll wait. So it is Wednesday. They'll have the full briefing at the end of the day on Wednesday, and so you could see the court rule Friday, maybe over the weekend, or maybe early next week. But again, the easy path out here, and if any Supreme Court justices are listening, the easiest path out here is to simply say, you know what, you can't appeal a TRO. That is in the rules, and we're not making an exception. And by the way, it's just a few more days before the court has to, proceed to the next step of a preliminary injunction or not. And then we, the Supreme Court, may never need to hear this case.
Marc, the big question everyone wants to know, though, is that a ton of justices on the Supreme Court align politically with Trump. If not, they were appointed by Trump himself. How has the Supreme Court treated Trump in cases similar like this before?
So first of all, look, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, and you just mentioned it, which is that the Supreme Court right now is essentially a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court, and and that is the reality that it is. It also, though, has a number of institutionalists, including, by the way, the Chief Justice, who are probably not spoiling to have more fights than they need to have with Trump. But to answer your question directly, Donald Trump actually fared pretty poorly as president before the Supreme Court. Like, he did a lot of overstepping and got and lost a lot of critical cases before the Supreme Court. Now, again, I get it. I know what everyone out there is. They're feverishly typing right now into the.
But Marc, the immunity decision.
Right, the immunity decision. I get it. And so that's why I'm not like, rose-colored glasses here. But, just as a matter of data, he did lose a number of cases. This is an easy one for the U.S. Supreme Court to avoid. But eventually they'll have to hear some of these cases. Eventually, one of these cases involving the right of him to fire people will come up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then the real test will begin. Let us hope that it does not happen on this case, on this emergent time frame. Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode. Please make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, and we'll see you next time.